For months now, I have been making videos about how broke everybody is and how people are not able to pay their bills. And the Chicago Fed just came out this week and confirmed what I've been saying, although with a little bit more of a rosy outlook and version of it, because they said that they're not really concerned yet about consumer debt levels. Okay, they're not worried about that, even though it's at all-time highs. But they are worried about consumer debt delinquencies, which means that you are late on payments or missing payments for things like auto loans, credit card bills, rent, student loans, different things that people have to pay for that they're not paying right now, guys. Credit card debt continues to explode month after month right now, and I think before you know it, we're going to hit 1.2 trillion. It was just last year we just hit over $1 trillion, guys, and then beginning of this year it went up to 1.1 trillion. Before you know it, we're going to be at 1.2 trillion. I mean, just the credit card debt alone in this country is climbing almost as fast as our government's deficit spending. It's really bad what's happening with this. In fact, they say that right now, delinquency transition rates rose for all debt types excluding student loans, which basically means that delinquencies are going back to pre-pandemic levels and then some. There's still a lot of student loan forgiveness, and people still have until I think September or October this year to really jump on board and start paying before there's some serious consequences to your credit and the ability to get the loan ever forgiven in the future. And check out this quote here. They say that the pickup in credit card debt and delinquencies is consistent with the idea that consumers, especially those within the bottom income and wealth distributions, are running out of surplus savings and turning back to credit cards to finance their spending. So here's the thing, it's not just low income people that are doing this, middle income people are doing this as well, guys, because middle income is not what it used to be. You know, just to be able to afford today's median price home, your household needs to bring in about 115, 120K a year just to qualify. And that's assuming your credit's good and you have enough money for the down payment. So middle income is not what it used to be, because the median income in this country is still $75,000 a year, but you need to make 120 just to be able to buy a house. So if you're a median income household right now, making 75K a year and renting because you can't afford to buy, what are the odds that somebody like that is probably loaded up with credit card debt as well, or is just now starting to turn to it as things continue to get more expensive? Because inflation, turns out, is not transitory. And you know the saddest part about all of this, guys? You know, we keep hearing about how good the economy is, and the GDP numbers for last year were just stellar, and the Fed and the government is all patting themselves on the back with this. But 80% of the GDP comes from consumer spending. And a lot of that spending has been on credit cards and money that people simply don't have. So they're celebrating the fact that people are going broke right now, when you look at it that way, because people are spending money they don't have, which makes the GDP go up. If they didn't have access to credit cards or pulling money out against the 401k or home equity loans or home equity lines of credit, how robust do you think the spending would be in this economy then? Not too great, I'm assuming. And one thing I hear in the comments a lot is people are saying like, oh, all the stores and restaurants near where I live are still full, it's still slammed. Well, think about this. Number one, if you live in like a very touristy area like I do, it doesn't really mean anything, because people are coming from all over the world to spend money in those places. But let's assume for a second that you live in a normal area, a regular town in the Midwest or whatever. How many of those people that are out spending that money actually have that money to spend? Or are they borrowing that money to keep fueling a lifestyle that they got used to during the pandemic? Because don't forget, you know, for a while there, people were getting paid more money to stay at home and not work than they did at work, and got used to a certain level of comfort and a certain level of lifestyle that people are still trying to hang on to. Now that, you know, we're getting hit with reality again, people have to work for the money, and they have to borrow the difference that they don't have in order to continue fueling that lifestyle. So things are not always as they appear, guys. Just because it looks like people are doing well and your neighbors are buying brand new cars doesn't necessarily mean that they are doing well. We saw a lot of this bubble type of behavior right before the GFC, where a lot of people looked to be rich but they were spending money they didn't have either. It was easy to borrow money against your ever-increasing home, which seemed like the bottomless piggy bank, which was proven not to be true, and it will be proven not to be true again this time around. But this creates big problems for the Fed, guys, because the Fed has been doing nothing but talking about how they're going to be lowering interest rates this year. If consumer spending were to weaken considerably, that would be a blow to the economy. And a slowdown in spending could in turn further complicate the Fed's thinking on where interest rates go next. Well, to me, if spending slows down enough, the Fed's probably going to do what they always do, and they're going to lower interest rates. But the problem with that is we already have inflation that is way too high, and they're just going to make inflation even worse. And guess what, guys? Things are not going in the direction that they want it to go, because the Atlanta Fed projected that the GDP was going to grow at 2.7% during the first 3 months of 2024, which would be cooler than expected, okay? What they say would still be solid. But guess what? The real numbers just came out, and it is far worse than they actually expected. The real GDP growth was only 1.6% in the first quarter. So think about that. They were projecting 2.7, it's only 1.6, and the 2.7 number they were expecting was actually lower than they want it to be. So imagine what this is going to do now. You know, what's happening is everybody's getting the wake-up call now, and these companies and the Fed and the government is starting to realize that people really don't have the money. Like I've been saying and other people have been saying here on YouTube, it's true. It's not fake. I saw several comments in my video the other day about the home insurance prices in Florida, and I don't know how many comments I saw, people saying, oh, you're lying, these numbers are fake, this is BS. Like, okay guys, those numbers I showed in that video are real insurance quotes from a real insurance agent here in Florida. It doesn't get any more authentic than that. Somebody who goes to buy that house is going to get those same numbers for their insurance quotes. So people don't want to believe that this is happening, but whether you believe it or not doesn't matter, because it is happening whether you like it or not. And why do you think the GDP is starting to go down? Well, it's because inflation. It's because people don't have the money to continue spending like they did before, guys. And I think the jig is almost up when it comes to people borrowing on the credit card and people borrowing against the 401k and borrowing against the house. I think we saw a lot of that start at the beginning of last year, and now a lot of that stuff has been exhausted too. You can only go so far in debt before creditors won't let you take on any more debt. That's why you're seeing the 10-year treasury spike right now, because people who invest in this are saying, wait a minute, inflation's not going down, and we actually think inflation's going to continue being high for the foreseeable future. So you're seeing the yields on these treasuries go to the moon, because it's the only way people will buy them, because investors need to get a return that they believe is adequate given the current state of the economy. And take a look at this chart, guys, from GDP, okay, all the way back to 2021. These are quarterly GDP numbers, whether you believe them or not, okay? And you can see in 2022 is when we clearly hit a recession, because the numbers were 2 negative quarters of GDP, which typically constitutes a recession, but nobody wanted to call it one. And then since then, it looked like things were recovering pretty nicely until recently, since the projections are all looking to be sub 2% moving forward. So let's get this straight. People already borrowed to the max here, and the GDP is starting to slow down, close to no growth, okay? And then if the economy shows any more signs of weakness and people continue getting laid off, or they just don't have money anymore to keep spending, that means GDP will start going negative again. Are they going to call it a recession then? They didn't call it a recession in 2022, even though it clearly was one. And you have to remember that spending is 80% of the GDP in this country. So what this chart tells you is that spending forecasts for this country are projected to go down over the next several quarters. It's showing you that they project people will not have the money to continue spending moving forward. But they say, don't worry, because spending on healthcare, insurance, and other services are continuing to grow. So once again, they point to spending, and all the cost of these things has gone through the roof, guys. In fact, a couple of you have written me asking me to make a video on how the healthcare system is a scam, especially here in Florida, and how much health insurance has gone up. I don't know, I feel like that's kind of far away from what I normally talk about, but it is kind of related to the economy, and especially older people really do need to have health insurance and use the health system more. So I don't know, I'll think about it. But the fact that they're pointing to the spending in these sectors has been growing, it's like, yeah, no kidding. Just like we talked about the other day with, Burger King and McDonald's saying their profits are up. Well, that's because they're charging more. Doesn't mean people are buying more burgers. It means they're spending more on the burgers that they are buying. Same thing with healthcare. It doesn't mean business is doing good. It means that these premiums have gone through the roof. Even my healthcare premiums exploded for 2024, guys, and I'm a young, healthy guy. I basically never use my insurance, and I just go for my yearly checkup, to do the blood work and make sure I'm okay. That's basically it. That's all I ever use it for. Once in a while, I have to see a specialist, not even every year. But they say they're seeing a slowdown when it comes to goods such as cars and gasoline, which are two things that people really need in order to live their regular life. Unless you live in a walkable area, you're spending money on cars and gasoline, and even that's going down. They're also seeing a slowdown in business inventory and international trade, which means transaction volume is low. It means that businesses don't see the need to carry extra inventory because their sales are slowing down and they're not shipping things as much as before. And this most recent report on GDP also confirms that inflation is not going to be going away anytime soon, guys. Excluding food and energy, which are the things we need the most, the CPI still rose 3.7% in the first quarter of this year. And the expectation was that it was going to be 3.4%. So once again, the GDP figures are coming in lower than expected, and inflation continues to come in higher than expected. Is that a sign of a strong economy? That's what people need to be asking themselves right now. And you know what, guys? I'm going to keep hammering this until we hit this major recession that we are barreling towards. And guess what? When we do, I'll be hammering it even more just to show you how wrong these people were. Then they go on to say, well, in 2024, employers around the country are still adding staff that's outpacing Wall Street's projections. So, those part-time jobs that everybody so desperately wants and needs to have 4 of them just to pay their bills are still increasing nationwide. And they also say here, they're not even trying to hide this anymore, an influx of immigrants is boosting growth and tax revenues. How about that? That's according to economists. And they say even though it's straining some government resources, having all these immigrants come in, it's boosting tax revenue and GDP. I mean, does anybody else see what's going on here, guys? You got all these people coming in here illegally. They're spending money. They have to spend money to continue to actually live their lives here. And so that boosts GDP because they're spending money. It's people that weren't here before spending money, number one. And number two, that spending gets taxed. Because anytime you buy something in this country, it is taxed. So that helps the tax revenue go up. But then in return, like they said, it puts a strain on the services they use because they're giving them free housing. Some states are even giving them, thousands of dollars a month in free groceries and whatever, which is just totally insane, but it's happening. Now they're thinking due to all of this growth, due to immigration and due to inflation not slowing down, that the Fed's target of 2% inflation might no longer be realistic and might end up settling closer to 3%. And as if all of that isn't bad enough, you have the amount of people's savings continuing to go down. So people are just not saving money anymore. You have mortgage rates that are hovering at 7.5% right now, locking 90% of the population out of the housing market. And also the wages report just came out. The average hourly earnings in March rose at their slowest annual pace since June of 2021, okay? And many economists now believe that those cracks will continue widening, and maybe that will slow down inflation, because if people don't have the money to spend, then inflation might slow down. But what it's really going to do is it's going to cause a financial crisis, guys, because when people can't spend money, all forms of business are going to suffer. You have businesses already reporting that things aren't going well. In fact, as of an April S&P survey, businesses reported a decline in new orders and reduced employment for the first time since the pandemic. And these surveys are the first indicators of each month to give a sense of how the U.S. economy is performing. And they say that high interest rates and elevated inflation put a dent in consumer demand. Guess what? that demand is going to continue getting weaker, like they said here, because inflation is not going to be going back down to that 2% target anytime soon, or maybe ever. And at the same time, people are not making enough money, guys. You just saw the wage growth is not there. The slowest annual wage growth in 3 years, at a time when things cost more than ever. U.S. manufacturing index just slipped to a 4-month low of 49.9. They say that anything below 50 usually indicates a recession. Also, new purchase orders, which are a sign of future sales for businesses, fell for the first time in 6 months and caused businesses to be more pessimistic of the outlook for the economy. So people are hiring less, and business outlook is starting to decline as businesses are starting to feel the pinch of this economy. So what's happening right now is the lag effect. You know, they started raising interest rates at the beginning of 2022, but okay, everything seemed to be going great in 2023. Economy's supposedly still booming, all this and that, but now we're starting to feel the effects of these higher rates, because the longer that the rates are higher, the more damage it does to the economy, which is what we're starting to finally see happen. And things are not about to get any better. They say as long as we have high borrowing costs, which is high interest rates, and elevated inflation, this is going to weigh down the economy and spending. And guess what? The more challenging business environment prompted companies to cut payroll numbers at a rate not seen since the global financial crisis in 2008, which means more companies are laying people off, guys, because they cannot afford to pay people when sales and business is going down. You know, one of the biggest indicators that we've had that a recession is here or is coming has been the inverted yield curve, okay? And now we have had an inverted yield curve for 18 months straight. The inversion of the 2- and 10-year Treasury, which we have right now, has correctly predicted every recession going back to 1955. And we've had this yield curve inverted since November of 2022. They say it can take up to 28 months for a full-blown recession to manifest after the yield curve inversion, guys. So it's been 18. That still gives us 10 more months of a runway to start seeing a full-blown recession, which is perfect timing just after the election. Although the way things are going right now, I think it could actually hit before then. I don't even know if the government or the Fed has any tools left in their toolbox to prevent that. They say that right now stocks are due for a correction, and the U.S. is in the midst of a 15-year secular bull market, which is the longest in U.S. financial history. And the only reason it's the longest bull market in history is because it's a fake bull market. It was all fueled by, first, the stimulus that was produced after the last GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, and now, most recently, the massive injection of trillions of dollars into the U.S. economy starting in 2020 during the pandemic. So if it wasn't for all of that, we would not be seeing this 15-year bull market. It would have been over years ago. But guess what? There's still people out there that say this time it's different, and we're just not going to hit a recession, and that we're just now starting a new bull market run. Like, come on, guys. Come on. Who's believing this? If history means anything, we have 10 months or less before the official start of the next recession. Okay, that's less than a year, which means that by historical standards, we are guaranteed to be in recession by this time next year, even if you don't believe we're already in one now. And you have companies that are just losing way too much money. In fact, Ford just announced that they have lost billions of dollars on all of their electric vehicles, guys. They're losing so much money trying to pander to these government mandates to sell these electric vehicles, and they're losing billions of dollars over it. In the first quarter of this year, Ford sold 10,000 electric vehicles, which is down 20% from the number it sold a year earlier, first of all. Its revenue plunged by 84% to about $100 million. And Ford says this is because of all the price cuts in the EV market right now. And that resulted in them losing $1.3 billion before interest and taxes. So how do you stay in business when stuff like this is happening? How does a company like Ford continue to make cars and be a profitable company when they're losing $1.3 billion in a year trying to pander and make electric vehicles, guys? Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. The answer is they can't continue down this road. If they try to, eventually they're going to go bust. They're going to go bankrupt, and Ford will go out of business if they keep trying to do this. And so a lot of this is because of also the EV price war. Tesla has been cutting prices on EVs like no tomorrow. It's been insane what they've been doing. And Ford's average loss on an electric vehicle right now is about $40,525 per vehicle, guys. Can you imagine that they're losing that much per car that they sell? How is that a sustainable business model? Some people will say, well, it's not as bad as you say, Michael. Things are still going pretty okay, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? I'm a forward thinker. I like looking at what might happen tomorrow, next week, or next year. So you can look at today and say, oh, the restaurants are full and my neighbor's driving a brand new car, and that must mean things are hunky-dory, but that's going to come to an end. So Ford says that, moving forward, they're going to be making changes in their EV business, and that the company's planned next generation of EVs will allow it to be profitable in the future. So let's see, how are they going to turn a profit when they're losing over $40,000 per car, guys? Are they going to make it out of plastic? I mean, they already make half the cars out of plastic now. But it looks like people are just over it when it comes to EVs in general, because even Tesla's having a hard time. Their earnings report came out and it plunged by 48% in the first quarter of this year, and their revenue fell by another 9%. And guess what? That's the biggest drop in sales and revenue for Tesla since the beginning of the pandemic. Even the infallible Tesla is feeling the pain now. Be ready, guys. Be ready for this recession to hit hard within the next 10 months, because it's already hitting many different sectors of the economy. It's just a question of when are you individually going to feel it, and by how much. That's really what you have to look at. And there's really no way to know that for sure, which is why I always tell people, get out of debt. Have gold and silver. Make sure your expenses are low. Those things alone can make it so much easier to survive an economic downturn than if you're levered up. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.